The proposed in-person meeting in Budapest between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin is reportedly no longer on the table. And there are no plans for the two to meet in the immediate future, according to multiple reports. While there have been no statements from either side on the reason for the course change, remarks from Russia's top diplomat just hours before the news broke suggest that there are still substantial differences between Washington and Moscow over how to end the war in Ukraine. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Peter Doran. He's an Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former president of the Center for European Policy Analysis. Peter, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So it sounded like President Trump was on a roll, that he was going to have a peace kind of negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. A little shaky meeting on Friday with the Ukrainian President Zelensky. Now it looks like nothing's going to happen. It looks like we're status quo.
Well, let's recall, President Trump has a hot hand right now. He's been on a roll. He has been solving some of the hardest wars and conflicts around the world, but the easiest war that he thought would be able to be cinched up very quickly has turned into the hardest piece to make. Here's the problem. We are seeing a clear pattern from Vladimir Putin. President Trump will have a very good call with Putin. It seems like the prospect for peace is on the table. And then once the diplomats get down to the nitty-gritty, get down to the details, Putin says, nope, I want my maximalist demands. And right now, that demand includes the destruction of Ukraine as a country. Obviously, that's not something President Zelensky can stomach.
So how does this play out then? I mean, this is back and forth. We've had a number of meetings, number of phone calls, and as you've pointed out, it almost looks like Vladimir Putin is kind of like Hamas, just buying time.
Well, that's right. The end to this conflict has a very clear equation. What needs to happen is that President Trump needs to draw a line. He needs to say no more and use the economic power of the United States to squeeze Putin's oil revenue. We have that ability. Let's recall that there are many countries around the world that continue to buy oil from Russia. Think about Europe right now. Hungary, Austria, Slovakia, they are funding this war by buying Russian oil, and at the same time, the European Union is sending Ukraine weapons. So the Europeans are essentially playing both sides here. That's got to stop. President Trump can drop secondary sanctions on countries that buy this oil.
And Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, actually has been advocating for that for some time. He has a bill that he's introduced in the Senate to do just that. We know that that works. That's what was used a number of years ago to bring Iran to the negotiating table when we squeezed their oil revenue through these secondary sanctions. So what are we waiting for?
Well, I think President Trump has given Vladimir Putin every possible off-ramp, every possible opportunity to accept the easy way out of this conflict, essentially saying both sides can declare victory and stop the fighting now. That would look similar to the North Korean War, but Vladimir Putin doesn't want to stop. He wants to go all the way, and that's why President Trump must make good on his promise of peace through strength.
Does that strength include Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine?
I hope it should, but let's also recall those Tomahawk missiles, yes, they can strike deep inside of Russian territory. Yes, they can hit military targets like Russian oil refineries, but they're not a silver bullet. No single weapon system is going to produce an end to this war. This war ends when Vladimir Putin no longer has the money to pay for this war, to pay for recruiting new soldiers, and that's where our secondary sanctions and America's economic might must come into play in order to create peace, finally.
And Peter, isn't there an economic benefit for the United States by squeezing Russian oil? Doesn't that create a demand for U.S. oil?
Absolutely. In fact, President Trump has been very clear on this. In order to demonstrate American economic might, we need to drill more. We need to produce our own oil, our own natural gas, and when we can, sell it to other countries. So what President Trump is setting up here is a win-win-win, a win for the U.S. economy, a win for the Ukrainians, and frankly, a win for Europeans who will live in a safer neighborhood. The main obstacle to peace right now is not the Volodymyr Zelensky. It's not the Ukrainians. It's Vladimir Putin and his Russian military. That's where the focus should be in order to create an end to this conflict.
Peter, Doran, just a little less than a minute left. How long does this drag on before the President Trump puts the squeeze on Russia in terms of the oil?
Well, it should have happened weeks ago. President Trump has already said he was prepared to do this. Secretary Bessent and the Treasury Department are on the line of scrimmage. They are ready to pull the trigger. It needs a go-ahead from President Trump. And I think what we've seen from the Russians over the last 24 hours is that they're clearly not ready for peace. They're clearly not ready to deal. That's why President Trump must absolutely make good on his threat and pull the trigger on secondary sanctions.
All right, Peter, Doran, I want to thank you for joining us. Great insight, and thanks so much for sharing it with us today.
Thank you very much.